Welcome to Business Africa. I am Ruth Lago. The top stories. African countries complain about the ratings they receive from global credit rating agencies. They would exaggerate the perceived risk for investing in Africa based on subjective factors. In the Congo, a forum on public-private partnerships in Brazzaville aimed at taking concrete steps to foster a more conducive business environment. Finally, more than 34 million people in Nigeria use cryptocurrencies, forcing the main capital market regulator to issue new rules. The ratings African countries receive from Western credit rating agencies limit their access to the capital market. Many nations have to borrow money at high costs. The African Union now wants its own agency that will take into account the realities of the continent.
The perception of investment risk in Africa remains high, forcing states into the dual role of high-cost development finance and commodity dependence. In 2020, as the pandemic tore through the continent, 56% of African countries were downgraded, compared to 31% of the global average. International agencies do not take into account the structural weakness of economies to generate international currency and judge the ability of states to repay their debt either in dollars or in euros. This is precisely what two African agencies, Bloomfield and Augusto, are trying to solve by adopting an approach based on local currency. But after more than 20 years of existence, they are unknown and still face the reluctance of the states.
I am now joined by the director of an African credit rating agency. Sir Stanislas Zezebaya, thank you for your time. You're the chairman of Bloomfield Investment Corporation. In your opinion, why did the African Union chairperson, President Macky Sall, call for the founding of an African credit rating agency?
What President Macky Sall really wants is to strengthen the capacity of the two agencies that already exist. You already have two Pan-African agencies, Bloomfield, which has existed for 15 years in Côte d'Ivoire, and Augusto, which has existed for 20 years in Nigeria. We need to strengthen them. It is not a question of creating a new agency that will cover all of Africa, because we generally cover most of the countries on the continent. Bloomfield is established in 20 African countries and 2 European nations. So the idea today is to create around these two financial rating agencies a Pan-African institutional framework that would allow these agencies to reach a certain level in terms of transaction volume and in terms of popularity. And that is what it is all about. President Macky Sall is right. The reason he is given is the reason that led to the creation of the Bloomfield Agency. International rating agencies have a rather biased perception. Therefore, it is necessary to create a Pan-African agency to have a better perception of the risk of African countries and African companies.
When compared to giants like Standard & Poor's or even Moody's, African credit rating agencies have trouble reassuring African states as well as foreign investors. Why?
I would like to remind you that we have been around for 15 years and 20 years for the two agencies. Moody's have been around for 130 years, so there is no comparison to be made. Standard & Poor's has been around for more than 60 years. This type of comparison will not work. What needs to be said today is how to strengthen Pan-African rating agencies. Already allow the Pan-African agencies to have a wider possibility of intervention on the continent in all 54 countries. By making this something not necessarily compulsory, but to encourage African countries to be rated by the financial rating agencies. You can imagine 54 countries that will then rate the companies in each country, and we'll end up having such a large portfolio that systematically gives us a certain size in terms of companies. The second thing is to say that if the African countries, the African presidents promote their own institutions, their own financial rating agency, Others will be obliged to follow, because the big problem is if our countries are going to be rated by other agencies and leave the financial and Pan-African rating agencies, why do you want others to consider that financial rating agencies are important if even the heads of state of Africa do not use them? This is the tragedy of Africa, that we abandon our own institutions to go and take institutions elsewhere because we think that they might be better, but they are not. It is important that Africans consider that it is Africans who will make Africa because they know Africa very well. So it is really with this mindset that the headquarters agreement granted to the Pan-African financial rating agencies will enable them to have a status that will convince all investors that these agencies are inviolable, therefore independent and cannot be influenced by anyone.
Tell us, what is the impact your credit rating agency has on the economic growth of the countries you rate?
This is an extraordinary weight. Today we rate in all risk categories: financial institutions, banks, insurance, companies, local authorities. And we see that the impact is extremely important on the cost of money. So companies and countries rated by Bloomfield borrow less and less on the capital market because their credit quality is known by investors. So the pricing of the loan is based on their credit quality or worthiness. We are in markets that are increasingly coherent because today we have this ability to establish the credit quality or worthiness of countries and companies that borrow in the local capital markets and in the local currencies. So this makes sense.
Thank you for answering our questions, Sir Stanislas Zeze.
Thank you and have a great day.
The Republic of the Congo ranked 180th in the latest Doing Business report on the ease of opening and operating a company. But Brazzaville wants to do better. The country presented a recipe for improving the business environment.
A Central African country with invaluable agricultural and mining potential, the Republic of Congo, whose economy depends mainly on oil revenues, has a challenge to meet: improving its business climate in order to attract more investors. The country's ranking in doing business, 180th in 2020, proves that it is far from achieving this. However, laws and texts have been passed to facilitate the creation of companies by making the procedures more flexible. Do not think that the business climate is only the 11 indicators of doing business. The business climate is also the fight against corruption. Thus, there are many institutions that have been created to improve the business climate. There are also many texts that have been taken for the creation of companies. To create a limited liability company, you no longer need a lease contract. In other words, the company director is no longer obliged to go and find an apartment to rent in order to domicile his company. To try to curb the scourge of corruption that affects almost all sectors of activity, the Minister of International Cooperation and Promotion of Public-Private Partnership has proposed, among other things, to put a stop to the slow administrative process. I think that there are many behaviors within the administrations, the ministries, that block the arrival of businessmen. When businessmen arrive in our country and they are confronted with some unorthodox practices, it is really difficult to do business. So we are working on exposing these practices, and we must not hide behind the law. In the business sector, time is important because time is money. Therefore, things must be done very quickly. When things drag on in the administrations, this does not encourage investors to stay in our country. If all the measures mentioned at the forum are implemented, Brazzaville hopes to become a popular destination for foreign investors.
Volatile, unruly, the adjectives to condemn cryptocurrencies are diverse, but in Nigeria, these virtual currencies are now part of everyday life, so much so that 34 million people pay using them. Faced with the reluctance of the central bank, the Securities and Exchange Commission chose to regulate the digital assets market. The Central African Republic became the first African country to adopt Bitcoin as a legal tender. The move sparked criticism from neighboring countries and international financial institutions. Yet, beyond these remarks, virtual currencies enjoy increasing popularity. In Nigeria, about 34 million people used cryptocurrencies despite the ban by the central bank and the launch of e-Naira last October. On a weekly basis in 2021, Bitcoin transactions worth approximately $8 million were carried out. These transactions were in form of remittance. Members of the diaspora transfer money to their families still living home. The Securities and Exchange Commission, Nigeria's main capital market regulator, issued new rules regarding the issuance, exchange and custody of digital assets in a bid to regulate the cryptocurrency market. Thanks for tuning into this week's edition of Business Africa. I'll see you soon on Africa News and africanews.com.